Hey guys, it's Mitch. How's it going? We're going to take a look today at one of my favorite comics of the 90s. In terms of execution of an artistic concept, I don't know if you can do much better in 1993. We're looking at Frank Miller's Sin City, A Dame to Kill For #1. So just before we get into it, if you enjoy the channel, if you feel like you might want to help out a little bit, go subscribe to my Patreon. Links are in the description, gives you early access to everything I do, helps out the channel, and helps to buy new comics. All right, so these days Frank Miller doesn't get a whole lot of attention. I mean, it doesn't help that he doesn't do a whole lot in terms of putting out comics, but when he does, he still gets kind of like, shuffled off to the side like, okay, Grandpa, just don't say anything too offensive. Like, if you're younger than, say, 35, you might not remember a time when Frank Miller was one of the most influential people in the comic book industry. So those of you who are familiar with Frank, just indulge me for a second while I do a quick recap. Frank Miller came into comics in 1979, went right on to the comic Daredevil, which was floundering at the time. Nobody gave a single shit about Daredevil, which is always the best situation to try out a new talent on and just let them do whatever they want. At first, Frank was not happy with the book. Mostly, it sounds like because of his editor and because of his writer, who were just, they were doing standard superhero fare, which he didn't really have any interest in. Then his editor got switched out with Denny O'Neil, and he recognized Frank wasn't happy. He remembered a story that he had written, like a backup story, that had impressed him, and was like, okay, why don't we try you writing this book? Because, I mean, the book is failing anyway. What do we have to lose by trying out the new kid? They moved his current writer off to another book, and just let him kind of fly out, do whatever he wants. So his first issue is Daredevil number 168, which coincidentally is also the first appearance of Elektra. And Frank would bring a gritty, hard-boiled element to Daredevil that really wasn't present in any other Marvel comics at the time. And Frank would turn that title around. He wasn't able to keep up both the writing and the drawing for very long, just on a monthly schedule. So he quickly focused on the writing and let Klaus Janson do the drawing, which turned out to be kind of an iconic team-up, and turned Daredevil into one of the more popular and, again, one of the more influential titles at Marvel. After that, he did the Wolverine miniseries with Chris Claremont, where they introduced the whole Japanese aspect of the Wolverine mythos, all the samurai stuff. And then you get a natural transition from that into Ronin, which wasn't commercially successful, but was, again, highly influential. And then, of course, 1986, Frank Miller writes and draws Batman: The Dark Knight Returns, and I don't think you get a more influential book than that. And the comic book industry goes fucking bananas. He follows that up by going back to Daredevil and writing Daredevil Year One, drawn by David Mazzucchelli, which is almost certainly the definitive Daredevil story. After that, he does Elektra Assassin with Bill Sienkiewicz, and then goes back to DC to do Batman Year One, bringing back David Mazzucchelli. I mean, from 1981 to 1987, it's an incredible resume. Like, honestly, in terms of just hit after hit and, like, just influential presence, I don't think there's anything that quite matches it. And then in 1987, DC was bandying around the idea of a rating system for comics. This would be above and beyond the comics code. And Frank Miller, along with a few other creators like Alan Moore, Marv Wolfman, Howard Chaykin, weren't having that shit. And they all fucked off from the big two for a couple of years at least. I think Marv Wolfman went back to do Captain America at one point, but, I mean, Frank Miller would never really do regular work for the big two again. Alan Moore, you get the feeling, maybe would have if DC didn't fuck him over for the rights to Watchmen. So after those books, Frank Miller's kind of bouncing around for a little while, producing a lot of just weird shit. He goes back and he does one more book for Marvel called Elektra Lives Again with Bill Sienkiewicz. And then he's doing Hard Boiled with Jeff Darrow. He does Martha Washington with Dave Gibbons. He does a RoboCop versus Terminator comic with Walt Simonson, which is fucking bonkers. And he's also working in Hollywood writing scripts for RoboCop 2 and 3, which, surprise, surprise, jaded Frank Miller further. So anyway, those last few comics have been printed at Dark Horse. And Dark Horse was also putting out an anthology book called Dark Horse Presents, where they would have 4 stories every month. And Frank decided to start contributing a story to that, which, I don't know, I have always gotten the feeling wasn't necessarily a coherent narrative from the beginning. But what ended up happening was this was a big shot across the bow that Frank Miller was back, and he was a bigger deal than ever. So if you haven't read Sin City, this is my extremely beat up version of the trade, because I don't value trades, and quite frankly, I think it works for Sin City. You really need to. You know, I'm not a guy who says what people should and shouldn't read, but Sin City is, in my opinion, required reading on the same level as Watchmen, Dark Knight. The first Sin City story starts out in a style kind of similar to Dark Knight, where there's a weird kind of rendering going on, and Frank is focusing way more on shadow. He doesn't have the no holding line effect that he would soon develop just yet, but he is very interested in contrast. You can see here where there's very little holding lines going on. So there are certain pages where that's the case, but you get any closer and he's able to get the holding lines into focus. So really only thinking about it as like an overexposed photograph from a distance. But some of the imagery in Sin City is just like some of the best imagery in comics. Shit like this, you can't really undersell, and he would work on his style over the course of this series, simplifying some parts, highlighting the contrast, getting rid of rendering. Not all rendering, though. That's the thing. This is why we're focusing on Dame to Kill for today. This is where I think he reached the apex of his style. So, yeah, by the end of the first Sin City thing, yeah, you can see, like, the contrast is turned up to 11, where he's just, like, discovering new things. It's amazing stuff. So, yeah, if you haven't read it, definitely check it out. But yeah, we're not taking a look at Sin City today. One, because I don't like looking at trades on these. I did want to take a look at the single issues, and, you know, if I ever get a chance to, I will, but they're pretty tough to track down, particularly the first one. So what we are looking at today, after a whole bunch of preamble, thanks for sticking around, is the second storyline in the Sin City universe. This is A Dame to Kill For. So the first series was all about Marv, who's a giant brute in Sin City. He's not a particularly good guy. He's kind of crazy, and he has a tendency to just kind of go off and go homicidal for a while, but he tries to live by a bit of a code anyway. The second series here is going to be about a character named Dwight, who, similarly to Marv, is not a completely moral guy. Frank Miller specifically wanted to tell stories that did not have a black and white morality, particularly in the wake of the rating system idea of DC, I think. He wanted everything to be shades of gray, where there were no definite heroes, and the best you could hope for would be an anti-hero. So let's get into this. We're going to start with the cover here. This is, to me, one of the best covers in comics. The composition is fucking incredible, and Frank has found the perfect balance to me for rendering versus just the brush stroke method that he's come up with. So having Dwight here set against the silhouette of the dame in the window with the Venetian blinds and everything, because this is a hard-boiled crime caper, where the lightest part of him is set against the black diagonal here, and the darker bits are set against the Venetian blind bits, except for the shoes, which cut into the silhouette of the dame figure. It's absolutely incredible. In addition to that, the shadowing is just fun. Like, it's not 100% realistic. It's more to delineate where the figure is, where you get like a big swath of light over like his shoulder or his pecs, and then everything else is these great folds that are just marked out with a brush. It's amazing stuff. All right. Oh, and one thing I didn't mention, this is put out by Legend, which was an offspring of Dark Horse. This was just after Image came out, and a bunch of guys were invited by Image to come and put out titles for them. So guys like Frank Miller and Art Adams, and I believe, I don't know about the guys like John Byrne and Mike Mignola or Walt Simonson, but all those guys went over instead to join Dark Horse and their new Legend line. So Image had all the new hotness guys, Dark Horse had all of the established masters, and Marvel and DC had Mark Bagley and Dan Jurgens. Yeah, no, early 90s was a crazy fucking time. All right, so Sin City, A Dame to Kill For by Frank Miller. That's it. This one does not have Lynn Varley doing any colors because there are no colors in this. Later on, Frank would experiment with doing single colors here and there. So, you know, the color red in The Babe Wore Red, or the color blue in, I think it was Hellenbach, or they had like an orange one. I don't know. There's weird issues in Hellenbach. I do not like Hellenbach very much. So we're going to start off. We're going to see our boy Dwight in action. And we're going to learn right away that Dwight is not a good guy. He doesn't have a particularly noble profession. He's a guy you hire to take photos of your husband when you think he's fucking around behind your back. So that you can get your proof later, you can get your divorce, you can get your alimony payments, and you can get on with your life. And we can see right from the get-go, Frank is back to having fun with contrast. He's using huge swaths of black with a brush to show all the folds and the sleeves of Dwight's jacket, not to mention in his eyebrows. I love the contrast of the light reflecting because he's perched over a skylight. This is the deal here, right? So all the light is coming up into his face. So you get the light just on the first knuckle of every finger, and then the rest is all in blackness, but that helps to separate the hand from the figure because we don't have any holding lines anywhere. So there's no line for Dwight's chin. We just get like the one shadow here over the indent. The camera here looks like it's pretty heavily referenced, right down to the strap, which looks pretty great. So, the people that Dwight has been waiting for enter the room. This is some guy whose wife hired Dwight to follow him around and take pictures of him cheating on her. And all of the dialogue, it's classic, hard-boiled Mickey Spillane type shit. Like, you're not missing anything here in terms of plot development or even necessarily character development. They are revealing characters through their dialogue, though. Like, we find out that Joey here, he figures that his wife is starting to suspect, so this is going to have to be the last time. But there does still have to be a last time. The feathering on the prostitute's dress here is incredible. And I love this here. Again, maximum contrast where if you're not looking too carefully, you might not even be 100% sure what you're looking at. Although, obviously, this is Dwight holding the camera. But again, no holding lines. And this is a style that, like, everybody wanted to try and steal in 1993. Especially Jim Lee for Deathblow. So, they're in a nice little hotel room. Joey helps Sally out of her dress. And he's bitching the whole time about how he's unappreciated. About how none of his employees give him the respect he's due. Again, wild stuff for the background here. No holding lines. I realize I've said that a few times now without explaining what a holding line is. Holding line is just an outline. Every once in a while, Frank will do it, like you can see here on the guy's collar. But for the most part, at least at this point in the story, he doesn't bother because it isn't necessary. He'll put in something in the background to stand out against the figure to help delineate it. So if he's got a light figure, he puts something dark in the background behind them. If he's got a dark figure, he puts something light behind them. So see, this comic here is the reason I got so pissed off at Rob Liefeld's half-assed effort for Shadowhawk #0. Because Rob figured he could just go in and figure it out on the fly. But when you actually see it done correctly, like what he's trying to accomplish. Because, he's trying to do the cool style. But there's so much more to the cool style than he even realizes when he picks up his pen. All of your darks and lights have to be figured out beforehand just to make your drawings visible. Otherwise, you have no idea what you're looking at. So anyway, Sally here, like I said, indulges Joey right down to the handcuffs. And as Dwight here says, it's all over pretty quickly. This is such a simple image, and it's so fucking creepy. It's incredible. Dwight gets all the photos he needs afterwards. She's all like, oh, I've never felt this way before about anybody before. Because of course she is, right? But again, things like a silhouette against a light background, just absolutely calling attention to both things. And while Sally is cuffed to the bed, Joey decides he has to make it so that this will no longer be a problem in his life. Because that has been the big concern. He can't keep away from Sally, but going back to Sally is eventually going to get him caught and get his life ruined, which he doesn't deserve. He's a good guy, right? So he's going to have to kill that hooker. Breaks out the Silence Browning 1911, which looks great. Like, the proportion looks exactly right. And of course, Joey himself is just the most revolting guy with his clothes off that you could ever imagine. He looks like fucking Clayface. This is an interesting shot here of the girl pleading for her life because it looks like the shot is almost blown up. It's strange. It's very fast compared to some of the other drawings in here. An interesting decision here to black him out both times, but to still show the expression, just like the eyes and the brow and the teeth. Like I said, very particular decision there. So, Having finished snapping all the pictures, Dwight hops down and takes out Joey right through the skylight. Tough shot to pull off and have it look like much of anything. So you got a silhouette Dwight here and half of Joey because of all the glass falling down, basically. And, you put the white background behind them. But that takes some real thought to come up with that particular solution. Once Dwight gets him down, he knocks him out. The hooker from the bed is screaming at Dwight to kill him. And Dwight says, nobody's dying, not while I'm here. Gets some great Sin City lettering, which is also all Frank. He's not the best letterer in the world, but the lettering style he came up with works perfectly with the aesthetic for Sin City. And that's all it needs to do. So since he won't agree to kill Joey, what he will do, obviously, is he'll free Sally. And he's going to cuff Joey here to the bed, along with the pistol, for him to be found naked. So that, coupled with the photos, is going to be the end of Joey. So giving Sally a ride back to Old Town, they get sideswiped by some crazy blonde in a convertible, which goes back to the original Sin City. And this is our first clue that the timeline here is a little bit fluid. And Dwight kind of clucks at this crazy lady who's driving along, just saying there's never any excuse for breaking the speed limit. We learn that Dwight is the kind of guy who just refuses to let himself off of a leash, because bad things happen when Dwight doesn't have a leash, even a self-imposed one. So we get back to Old Town. Sally gets dropped off, and she just kind of saunters away into the night. Great shot of her walking away. Like, he's really gotten a knack for doing like the folds in clothing with just like a single swipe of a brush, or at least it feels like he does anyway. We've got what I assume is Gale here, who showed up at the end of the last Sin City story and will show up even more so in the next one. And part of the deal with Old Town is that the hookers basically are top class. Like, the city might be a piece of shit, but the people who run the town brought in all the hottest girls they could. And now Old Town has this tradition of having incredible prostitutes. And then Dwight is just going to hang out in his car to kind of chill out after the evening's excitement. So afterwards, Dwight goes to meet basically his handler. This is Agamemnon, and he's the guy who gives Dwight all of his assignments. So Dwight has this really kind of shitty existence where he's either going out and ruining people's lives by taking gross pictures, or he's, going back to this fucking disgusting guy living in this shithole who absolutely loves seeing the gross shit that Dwight brings him. Fantastic shot here. Doesn't make a ton of sense in terms of the lighting, with the arm here hanging where you would assume like it would be lit up, but if you have it silhouetted against the rest of the shirt, then you can see better what's going on without having to do outlines, right? And of course we get an Elektra cameo here as well, in case you were wondering what Frank drawing of Elektra would look like these days. So after Agamemnon develops the photos for him, Dwight goes to take them to the wife. And the wife has a lawyer to kind of handle this, and he's just, okay, thanks, these will do. Here's your money. Please get the fuck out. And on his way home, Dwight is just kind of reflecting on just how shitty he's let his life get, and just, how much he'd like to cut loose for a second. Great close-up here. Like, that is so fucking good in terms of, like, intensity. And so, yeah, gooses the accelerator one time and then shuts himself down immediately. Just saying, never lose control, not for 1 second, never let the monster out. And we get the Frank Miller repetition, but this is before it would become like a caricature kind of thing. But, telling us about our main character here in a pretty short span of time. So later at his office, he's got like a detective's office, which shouldn't surprise us, I guess, given what kind of story this is. Another great shot with like not a ton of detail, but just enough to make it look, like it works in a world and we're not skimping. And this is a place, of course, that's just shrouded in shadow, as all of Sin City is, and it lets Frank play around with the compositions and just, see what he can get away with in terms of the high contrast stuff, which is great. That's what we're here for. Dwight's just watching the highlights of the game, try to distract himself again. Phone rings, and the voice on the other end asks for him. We don't see a face, we just see the mouth. A lot of white media on those lips, just to kind of bring your attention to them. And Dwight recognizes the voice immediately. So this is Ava, this is Dwight's kind of ex. Basically, she had Dwight wrapped around her little finger. And Ava's calling because she needs Dwight. She's gotten herself in deep, and he's the only one who can help. And of course, Dwight listens like a fucking goof, because he can't help himself. Well, at least not when it comes to this girl. So he agrees to meet her at like a dive bar in Old Town, which happens to be the place where Marv usually hangs out. So that gives us a bit, again, some more placement in the timeline. Because if you know how the first Sin City story goes, you know, Marv probably shouldn't be here. Not here specifically. But yeah, Dwight walks in and it's just, the air is thick with smoke. I love this treatment. Like, you get exactly what he's going for. And, you know, he sees Marv beaten up on a Deathblow lookalike. And, you know, isn't particularly disturbed. You know, how's it going, Marv? You know, same old, same old. And yeah, so I don't think I realized this was Deathblow the first few times I saw it. Because really the only real clue, I guess he's got like kind of the vest thing on, but Deathblow isn't a very recognizable character. He doesn't have very many distinguishing characteristics other than having the do-rag with the two lines going up it, which you can kind of see here, but it's a little difficult, particularly when you have a no holding lines, high contrast style. But I guess when Jim Lee first did Deathblow, he didn't exactly run it by Frank first. That would be maybe my supposition. Because it seems like Frank didn't care too much for Jim's rendition. Now, if I recall later on, there was stuff that made it seem like, you know, Jim and Frank were fine. This might have just been like a friendly, like, dude, come on. You gotta at least try and hide it a little better if you're gonna try and bite my style like that. Or ask permission, you know. So Dwight's just gonna hang out. He's gonna mingle with all of the locals in Basin City. We get a couple of the guys here and there who were in the first storyline. Just, you know, background people. But, you know, Dwight isn't here for any of them. He's just waiting for Ava. And then she walks in. And Frank lets her just, like, steal the show for a page. He even lets up on the smoke that's crowding the atmosphere because he doesn't want it to, like, go over her face or anything. But that is a wild fucking splash. And yeah, she shows up and immediately starts into, like, how she needs him and how she's in trouble this time. We get a very dramatic exchange between the two of them that could have been out of, yeah, like Mickey Spillane or something. And she's talking like she's looking for his forgiveness. Dwight keeps trying to turn her down. Like, he can barely look at her most of the time because, like, he'll just do whatever she wants if he looks at her too long. And then she kisses him, and he doesn't stop her because, of course, he doesn't. But once he lets her finish the kiss, he's like, "You do that again, and I swear I'll kill you." So, still very much wrapped around her little finger. And so that's kind of the signal for her servant here, Manute, to come up and tell her, okay, it's time to come back to your husband who you've been claiming has been abusing you and runs your life. And she's been kind of intimating that this is going to kill her, like, sooner than later. And I like this here where, you know, like, Dwight immediately stands up to Manute. Because, again, he can't help himself when Ava's involved. And then you get Marv in the background here, just kind of casually like, "You want me to take this guy down for you? I got nothing else going on tonight." And Ava holds Dwight back and he's like, no, we can't start anything. Just remember me. And she goes off into the night, like, looking after him. So, like, hook, line, and sinker, you know. Guy's a complete sap. And I mean, he knows it at least, so you got to give him that. But yeah, once this is started up, there's no way he's not going to get involved, which she would have known. That's the whole reason she came down. And we get our title drop at the end here. Marv and Dwight watch them drive away. Marv is like, "Buddy, I don't mean to poke my nose in where I don't belong, but that there's a dame to kill for. Why'd you let her go?" And we know that Dwight is not going to let her go. Dwight's going to be following up on this, at least for the next 5 issues. And this is the first time seeing the actual issue. I didn't realize they had, like merch. There's, like, Sin City t-shirts and shit. The Sin City postcard collection. All right, cool shit. And you also get the cover without the title treatment if you want to see it that way. And it's fucking sick. So, yeah, that is Sin City, A Dame to Kill For, #1, which I absolutely love. This, I think, is Frank's best version of this crazy style that he came up with, where there's still, like I said, a little bit of rendering here and there when it needs it. But for the most part, he has found the right balance for the high contrast stuff. In Big Fat Kill, which is the next storyline, he gets a bit blockier with his whites and blacks. Also, just his characters get a lot stiffer as he gets, like, maybe a bit more symbolic, like a little bit more entrenched in the style. And then by that Yellow Bastard, he's, like, scribbling over shit. And it feels like he's pushed it as far as he can in terms of, like, just making it aesthetically interesting. And now he's just trying to see how he can change it a little every time. He's just fucking with it. Which I'm not as much of a fan of. I like this particular era. But, yeah, so I'm planning on continuing with this particular series just so we can see more of these awesome compositions. And I haven't read this storyline in a few years. And when I did, I didn't go through it in hyper detail. It's not generally how I read, aside from these videos. So it'd be awesome to go through and just examine it, like, with a fine-tooth comb. So we'll have that to look forward to going forward. But for this one anyway, that's going to do it. Thanks very much for watching. If you like this video, please hit like, hit subscribe, hit the notifications so you know when the next one's coming out. Go over and subscribe on my Patreon. It gives you early access to everything I do, from the Blood Force stuff to the YouTube videos before they get uploaded to YouTube, as well as some Patreon exclusive content. You can also follow me on Instagram and DM me there for commissions, and you can join the Blood Force Discord server. But yeah, that's going to do it. Thanks again for watching, guys. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.